The Institute.
Institute for Justice.
The National Law Firm for Liberty.
Welcome to Deep Dive with the Institute for Justice. I'm Melanie Hildreth. Earl Dickerson of Wilmington, Delaware, says that as far as he's concerned, his car was stolen, but he can't go to the police about getting it back. That's because it was the city of Wilmington itself that was responsible for taking Earl's car. I'm here with IJ Senior Attorney Rob Johnson and IJ Attorney Will Aronin to talk about Wilmington's tow and impound system and all the ways that it violates constitutional rights. Will, can you start by giving more detail about what happened to Earl that makes him describe his situation the way that he did?
Yeah, thanks so much. So Earl Dickerson is a 73-year-old grandfather who has lived in Wilmington for 50 years. He parked his car legally on the street, and he was hit pretty hard by the pandemic, and he couldn't really afford to drive it very often. So Wilmington came around, and they said he had to move it within 7 days. They put a ticket on his window. Unfortunately, just timing was bad, and Earl was sadly dealing with the death of one of his grandchildren, and he missed the deadline. So he had left it too long in the spot, and Wilmington told its towing contractors to go and tow and impound his car, and they left him a $60 ticket. That's it. Earl understood he could have made a lot of excuses. He was going through a lot. But he paid the $60 ticket right away in a couple of days. He paid the $25 release fee, and that should have been the end of it. But he went to go and get his car from the impound lot, and the impound lot told him, nope, we're not releasing it, not unless you pay us an additional $910. Now, let me be clear. That impound lot had absolutely no legal right to charge Earl anything else, certainly not more than $900. But they had his car, they were not releasing it, and Earl couldn't afford to pay the ransom, so 30 days went by, and the towing company just scrapped his car and kept the whole value.
It's unbelievable. So what is the connection between the city and the towing company?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wilmington issues a lot of tickets, but it doesn't actually run its own impound system. Instead, it's outsourced its impound and towing program to private companies, but then it didn't actually pay those companies, money. It just gave them the power to keep and scrap people's cars. It's crazy. So let me try to say it another way. Wilmington the city got its impound program for quote unquote free to them. These private companies make money by keeping and scrapping many of the cars they tow, and car owners in Wilmington just lose it all. They just lose their car and it pays for it. It's a staggeringly unconstitutional system.
Yeah, so they will find a car, give you a ticket. Then everything then from that point on goes through the private company. Like the city will ticket your car, and then you're kind of dealing with these contractors for the rest of the that interaction. It seems like there's the potential for a lot of miscommunication. And that the person who ends up bearing the burden for trying to get this resolved then is the person who lost their property. Is that kind of how it works in practice?
I mean, yeah, it's not just like the potential for miscommunication. It's just ripe with abuse. So you have to go to the city and pay the tickets, which is fine. You have to go there. Earl had to pay his $60. It is what it is. But then the company that actually is holding the car, they have to release it. And right now they're holding cars hostage for storage fees and other fees that they're just not legally entitled to charge. So basically they've been given this governmental power to take people's stuff, hold it, and then they're abusing it by essentially demanding money that they're not entitled to. It's really just offensive.
Is what happened to Earl typical, or is he is a really very sad story? But you can always find one sad story. How representative is his situation?
I got 986 more of them to tell you about. So in 2020, the towing company kept 987 out of the 2,551 cars that they towed. So it's almost 40% of the cars they towed, they kept.
Rob, can you talk about the other client that IJ is representing, where we're representing Earl and challenging the system, and a woman named Amira? Her story has a couple of even more outrageous components to it that I think are important to highlight as we look at this.
Yeah, so Amira, she was parking her car on the street in which she thought was legally parked. A parking officer disagreed, gave her a number of tickets. And while she was appealing those tickets, the city of Wilmington towed her car. The city has a policy that they'll tow any car that's owned by any person who owes more than $200 in tickets. So, in Amira's case, because they claimed that she owed these tickets, they towed her car. They then take it, and what they do is they essentially hold your car for ransom. And they say if you don't pay these tickets right away, the full amount, within 30 days, then the tow company gets to keep your car. And so Amira couldn't afford the $200 plus dollars in tickets that she owed. And as a result, the tow company kept her car. And then, you might think that then that would be at least mean that she doesn't owe the tickets anymore. But you would be wrong. Actually, what that means is that she's lost her car and she still owes the tickets. So, in her case, the car was worth well more than the value of the tickets at issue. And the tow company gets to keep the entire value of the car. And the city then continues to claim that she owes these tickets. They're sending her debt collector notices. They're trying to collect this amount. And it's compounding with interest. So she actually owes more after she lost her car than she supposedly did before she had the car towed in the first place. So it's just, as Will said, it's just a staggeringly abusive practice.
The fact that they didn't credit, first of all, that they didn't credit any piece of the value of the car toward the tickets is bad. The fact that they didn't give any of the money back to her is crazy. It makes it feel like this whole system is just designed to punish people because there's no, I'm trying to find like, oh, well, this piece of it could make sense, but it just seems like you want people to suffer and you want to make a bunch of money for a private company. I mean, what am I missing here?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that essentially this is all a big money-making system, right? And so the city is making money by charging these tickets and collecting on the tickets. The tow company is making money by taking people's cars, and the city then doesn't have to pay the tow company. So it's just a big money-making system. I don't even know if it is intended to punish people. Maybe that's part of it, but I just think it's intended to make money.
They just don't care, the fact that people could suffer. And so in Amira's case, even if somebody is just like, gosh, I really feel bad for what happened to you, I'm going to give you a new car. This could happen to her again because that amount of tickets continue to accrue and the system just would just keep churning her through car after car.
Yeah, so because she still owes more than $200 in tickets. If she was to get a new car, like if someone was to give it to her, for instance, then it would be towed, because that's the city's policy. And then if she couldn't pay the tickets, which again are compounding with interest, then they would take her new car and she would still owe the tickets.
So this is, a pretty egregious example of what seems to be profit-driven policing. But there are pieces of it that I think exist in other places and other cities' towing and impound programs. And I think one of the things that people might be sympathetic to in those systems is the idea that, keeping the streets clean is expensive. The city has a lot going on. These people just won't pay their tickets, or they won't listen to whatever the meter maid has been telling them about their car for 7 days or 30 days or whatever it might be. And that maybe some of the burden of enforcing the rules should fall on the people who are breaking the rules. What's the response to that, and how does that factor into what's going on in Wilmington?
I'm sympathetic to the idea. People should follow the law, and cities can collect debts that they're legitimately owed. If someone owes a lot of parking tickets, no one's saying the government can't collect it. They just can't go around and take people's stuff off the street because they think that person owes them a couple of $100. There's this thing called due process. It's important. It's in the Constitution, I swear. So the cities know where their courts are. They can go. They can file an action. They can get a warrant, get a judgment. But if you think about a private debt collector can't just say, that's a really nice car there. You owe me a couple $100. I'm going to take it until you pay me. It's not how it works. If private debt collectors can't just take your stuff, then the government should be held at least to that standard. And honestly, they should be held to a much higher standard. Don't just take people's things.
That's actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, I was just say one thing I'd add to that is, you could put people on a payment plan. You get a judgment, and then, somebody like Amira, she's on Social Security for disability. She has a bad back. She needs a car to get around. She can't get around without it. And she, $200 or, the amount of the tickets was slightly more than $200. To her, that was an amount of money that she just couldn't pay it as a lump sum. And that's true of a lot of people who live paycheck to paycheck. But you put people on a payment plan, you make it something that they can actually, deal with. And then you don't take away their car, which for most people, if you take their car, how are they going to pay the tickets? Because they need the car to get to their job.
It's exactly right. Like these types of programs where cities are funding themselves based on just fines and fees, it's targeting the most marginalized communities, like people that the cities don't believe are going to be able to fight back, which is why I feel honestly so blessed to be able to be here and fight for them, because it's just wrong. Like cities are picking on those who they think can't fight back. So I'm glad to fight.
Well, that's a perfect transition to my next question, which is I kind of spoiled the surprise earlier, and this is obviously a terribly unconstitutional system. IJ is challenging it. Why don't we talk about the lawsuit that we're bringing? You alluded, Will, to a couple of constitutional protections that are clearly not being followed here, things that private individuals would have to respect that the government's not respecting. Can you walk through some of the different components of the lawsuit, and how do you begin as a public interest firm to start to tackle a system that is just rife with abuse the way that this one is?
One piece at a time, just methodically planning and attacking. Because this program, I don't think, and I don't want to challenge cities to try, but I don't think someone could have designed an impound program worse than this one. But again, that's not a
challenge accepted.
Yeah, I was afraid
somewhere
of that.
there's a city official like I can do it.
Yeah, so this violates a lot of the Constitution. I'm just going to go one by one. So as Rob mentioned, they are taking and seizing someone's car because the car owner supposedly owes a debt. They're then scrapping the car and not attributing the value of that car towards the debt. So that violates the takings clause. If the government takes your property because you owe it money, it has to, A, actually credit the value of that property towards the debt, and then return the excess. Amira's car was worth approximately $4,000, and she owed approximately $300 in tickets. They should have returned the excess value. They can't just keep the whole thing. So that violates the takings clause. This also violates the Fourth Amendment. For some reason, we're all just used to the idea that like cities will tow cars because people owe a couple $100 in parking tickets. That may be common, but it's not constitutional. It violates the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says the government can only seize your property with a warrant, with probable cause, or with some exceptions. Imagine if the car is blocking traffic or parked at a fire hydrant. They can't just go around and take someone's car that's legally and safely parked off the street and hold it for money. The Fourth Amendment doesn't have a you owe me exception. So that's the takings clause in the Fourth Amendment. This also violates due process. They are not giving people notice before taking their cars. They're not giving people a hearing before taking a car. And there's really inadequate post-seizure process too. Had the city given Earl a hearing on those supposed storage fees, like he could have said, hey, this company has no right to charge me the money. Release my car back to me. There wasn't a mechanism by which to do that. And then this also violates the excessive fines clause. Fines need to be proportionate to the offense. And someone's car, as we've talked about, is so critically important to their lives. It's how they visit family, go to the doctor, get food. And completely on the opposite is a parking violation is amongst the lowest level of offenses that we have in this country. It's literally the cliche low offense. No one should ever lose their car because of a few unpaid parking tickets. That's just an excessive fine.
Yeah, listeners may be familiar with the Timms case that IJ litigated, where we challenged the forfeiture of a vehicle because of a low-level drug offense as an excessive fine. And, if you can't lose your car because of a drug offense, surely you can't lose it because of a parking ticket. Yeah,
that's one of the things that you said. Well, I want to kind of go back because there's a lot of really interesting, a lot of really interesting legal provisions that you're talking about and sort of the practical applications of them. the needing a warrant to tow your car, I think that almost anybody who's listening is probably thinking like, well, my car is, you said it's common. I bet everybody knows somebody whose car has gotten towed. And as you noted, like there's almost never any sort of warrant or notice or anything given. You just come back and your car is gone, and then you see a sign that says, call this number or something. Is the reason that happens just because nobody has ever challenged it before, or because usually it's happening on private property and the property owner can say, look, I really don't want people parking. This is my property, and I'm going to call in a towing company to get rid of it. And then it's more of a private contract, private trespassing kind of situation. But on city streets, the situation is different.
Yeah, so two points, because you're sort of right on both counts. So yes, when someone's on private property, that's not the government doing it. That's not a constitutional issue. If there's a private garage that someone's trespassing on, I guess they can call a tow company. That's not at all what our lawsuit's dealing with. Our lawsuit's also not dealing with illegally parked or unsafely parked or cars that have been in an accident. Again, nothing to do with that. But honestly, part of it is, I think, because people are not challenging it. We've all just gotten used to the fact that tow companies go around legally on public streets and take legally and safely parked cars. It's actually one of the reasons I'm so excited about this cause of action, is because it strikes me as this should be clear, and everyone should know that the government can't take your stuff without a warrant. And I think we have a really good way of, or a good case to make that clearer in law and prevent the government from doing it to everyone, just anyone and everyone who's parked.
Well, and to be clear, I mean, the way this works is what you get a judgment, right? So like in Amira's case, what the government should have done is they should have finished litigating the park it tickets, which, she was still appealing. And then they should have gotten a judgment that she owed this money. And then once you get a judgment, you can actually get a warrant from the court to enforce the judgment. And so then you get a warrant. And then once you have the warrant, then that allows you to seize the property. So we're not saying, the government can never seize somebody's property, ever. I mean, that's not what we're saying. But there's a legal process that you follow. And that process is first you get a judgment, and then you get a warrant to enforce the judgment. And the government's just not following that process. And you can see in Amira's case what a difference it makes, because it meant that they towed her car while she was still appealing these tickets, which is just outrageous.
One of the things that struck me initially when I was learning about this case, when IJ was investigating what was going on in Wilmington, is that relationship between the private company and the government, and the way that the power of the government had sort of been delegated. And I mentioned that earlier, sort of, how does that work? Is that something that is so common that it's not something, or so okay, constitutional, whatever, that we're not challenging it? Or is that something that is potentially legally problematic, the way that the private companies now get to profit off of, the enforcement of the law?
It's at the very least rife with abuse. So unfortunately, government power is delegated to private companies really too often. And you have these companies that, that's what companies do. They are there to make money. That's fine. That's why they exist. But when they're able to use the coercive power of government, it can be abused. Think private prisons. I'll give you a really good example. Like, the private company, again, I keep using this line, but cannot just take your stuff, right? But if you go in and take someone's property and destroy it without their permission, that's generally a crime. You can't just go about do that. But these companies are only allowed to do that because the government has given them the power to. They've basically deputized these towing companies. And at the very least, if the government's going to empower these companies to use state power, then these companies are also subject to the Constitution. They have to abide by the protections. And that's exactly why we're suing the private companies for violating the Constitution too, because they use the state power. You got to stick by the Constitution.
It seems like a very obvious and important check, but something that has always personally made me a little bit skeptical of like public-private partnerships, because it's like, I feel like you get the worst of all worlds sometimes. I wanted to talk too about the implications for if we win. This is an especially abusive system. But IJ actually has we have other, as people who've listened to the show know, we have other cases that challenge fines and fees systems that are abusive, that do fall so hard on people who can't pay. We actually have another case challenging a towing system, an impound system in Chicago. How similar is what's going on in Wilmington to other things that we have seen and challenged, and how do those different cases impact each other?
So, in terms of the Chicago case, obviously Chicago has all different sorts of procedures and some of the details are different. But I think the commonality between the two cases really goes to the heart of it, which is that in Chicago as well, they're holding onto people's cars essentially as they're holding them for ransom, just like Wilmington does here too. They say, we won't give your car back unless you pay this money that we say that you owe. And if you can't pay it, there it's within 35 days, then generally they'll scrap your car. So same basic problem. And then similarly here, once they've taken your car, in Chicago they'll credit it towards some of the fines and fees that people owe, but not all of them. So you could lose a car that's worth more than the fines and fees and still owe it. And I think the fact that that's the commonality is revealing, because that's the
worst
profit
part.
incentive.
That's the worst part.
And it's the part where they're making money, right? Like
Yeah.
the procedures and the sort of like everything around that can differ from city to city, but the thing that's common is that it's a money making scheme, and that's what it's about.
Do you get the sense from having looked into these sorts of systems that it's that is a widespread problem? We're challenging these two where it is directly on point, but have you seen it elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think
go ahead, Rob.
Will might, I know Will's looked at Philadelphia, for instance. I mean, there's a lot of cities with these types of problems. And in general, cities taking people's cars and essentially holding them for ransom, that's something we see across the country. And it's a huge problem. Because again, I mean, your car, second to your house, if you own a house, which, many people don't, is probably your most important piece of property. And for many people, it's probably more important than their house, because they need their car to earn a living, to see their families, to get medical care, to buy food. I mean, it's just an immensely important piece of property for people. And to take that and say, pay us now, or we're going to take your car, it's unconscionable.
The stakes are clearly very high, practically, legally. What happens if we win in Wilmington? What happens to the clients? And to what extent is a victory in Delaware exportable, or something that would be meaningful in other places like Chicago, or places that might not be quite as bad, but still are pretty bad?
Our hope, our plan, our goal is to export this. We want to win binding circuit precedent that says that these types of abuses are just unconstitutional. And the good news and the bad news about that are the same thing. So good and bad, we're not going to get rid of parking tickets. The cities can still ticket people, I guess. And it doesn't even mean that they can't collect tickets. That's what we keep wanting to focus on. But what Wilmington and Chicago and Philadelphia and just cities across the country have to do is they have to create a constitutionally sound tow, impound, probably not scrap system that actually respects due process, that doesn't just take people's property for little ticky-tack fouls, that doesn't just grab people's things off the street. They have to actually respect that the Constitution limits the government's power to take and destroy people's property. And then maybe they need to go back to the drawing board and realize that don't take someone's car over $200.
What about the clients? I think one of the questions that people often will ask when I tell some of these stories is there any way for them to be made whole again? Or is it just that this was so outrageous, they're being very courageous and trying to prevent it from happening to other people, obviously. But for them, is it just the bad things have happened and they have to move on? Or is there a way for, a victory here to improve the situation for Earl and for Amira?
We had the press conference in this case, and one of the reporters asked that question. And I was very impressed by both clients that the first thing they said was, we just want this to stop and we don't want this to happen to anybody else. And that, for both of them, that's why they're doing this. That they feel how horrible this is, and they want to make sure it never happens to anybody else. And I admire that. And of course, for them personally, we are trying to get damages, just the value of their cars, to make sure that they're, I don't think, and they'll never be made whole, right? Like, you're never made whole in any case, but to at least put them somewhere closer to where they were before this all started.
It can make a life or death difference for them, and being able to replace the property perhaps, or so very, very important for them and for everybody in Wilmington. Thank you both for taking the time to talk through the case and what we're going to do. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more like it, you can find more episodes of Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe.